A very good afternoon to everybody that's joining us on this Monday afternoon. We're in the middle of May already, can you believe it? And time is definitely flying, and we've been doing this for over a month now, a month and a half from the beginning of April, from our first speakers that's joined us, which has been quite exciting in terms of that. And today I've got a guest speaker, which was actually a lecturer of mine while I was studying law at Nelson Mandela University. And a very good afternoon to you, Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller. How are you doing?
I'm very fine, Neil, and it's very nice to be in contact with you and to be on the show, of course.
Anytime. I couldn't think of anybody better to get on with this series. And it's been so phenomenal, the speakers that we've had on. And I'm excited to hear today what we're going to be discussing as well. And before we get there, I just want to go into some admin for those just joining us. I'd like to know where you're from, so I can see some people joining us. Deborah, Viv, myself, I can see all of you that's joining at the moment. I'd like you to just comment in the comment box and tell us where you're from. Is it Port Elizabeth? Is it Johannesburg? Is it Cape Town? Is it Durban? You know the drill by now. So do go to our comment box, comment there, tell us where you are from, and let's get the comments going specifically. Narnia will be open for comments during this afternoon session. And while we discuss the interesting topic as well, don't forget this coming Wednesday we've got Vinnie Lingham joining us at 5 o'clock from America. It is a 5 o'clock session, so don't be at 3, be at 5 o'clock on the Wednesday. This coming Monday, this coming Friday, I'll be talking marketing with you. And then next week, Monday, we go over to Kobe Portuguese, which is going to talk all property things. And then don't forget our speakers for June. We've got Ida Fenter. We've got quite a few people joining us in our sessions for June, which is going to be only Wednesday sessions at 3 o'clock. That's some of the admin done. I can see Warren is already saying good afternoon, Neil, and Narnia listening from Port Elizabeth as well. So very good afternoon to you, Warren. If the rest of you could also comment and just tell us where you are from. Belinda saying, hey, Narnia, Neil, watching from Benoni and Gauteng. So quite a few people starting to join in. It would be nice to, there's Fundi she's joining from Kempton Park. So Narnia, let me go into and introduce you properly and go into a little bit of a write-up about you before we start off. So I obviously mentioned that Narnia was my professor when I was studying law at Nelson Mandela University. So she was a professor of law and taught in PE for 16 years. After 16 good years, she decided to move to Pretoria in 2011 and now is a divisional executive of the Development and Capable Ethical State Research Division at the Human Science Research Council. Yeah, that's a mouthful by itself. She travels a lot. So this is obviously a very nice job to have because I always see it in a different country as well. She works on a range of issues including sustainable development, human rights, social justice, transparent and accountable government, and active citizenship. Lately, she has been working on the UJ Center for Social Change at COVID-19 Democracy Survey. She's unfortunately, she's had no time for hobbies, but she relaxes by watching movies and Netflix. She loves reading, but with all the Zoom meetings she's had, that obviously hasn't happened too much. Also a big thing, and I was definitely one of the people rooting for her a few years ago. She was one of the top 14 candidates for the public protector position a few years ago. And that in itself is a massive accomplishment. And very welcome to you, Narnia.
Thanks a lot, Neil, and thanks for the kind introduction. Again, it's very nice to be with you. And I see that people are joining us as we're talking. And I must tell everybody that Neil was a fantastic student. He wasn't only serious, but he was lots of fun. And you really made a huge success, despite not really using your law degree. But I must admit, I'm not in law anymore either. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
No, look, I was in law, I think, for 3 years at a firm in Port Elizabeth. And then after that, I decided to spread my wings. And I've been quite happy, you know, not being in law. Sometimes I miss the structure a little bit. You know, that you get it, because with law it's very much this. If I get something here, this is the way forward. Because I did conveyancing, and it's easy when you get it the deal in, you know what to do, what's the next steps, nothing really changes, and there's the 1 in 20th deal which could be a little bit different. And sometimes that's nice, but I also like different. And I think that's why I love the marketing side. A few more people joining in. Colin saying hello from Durban. Please, if you're joining in this morning, I can see there's quite a few people in. Please just comment and tell us where you're from. And if there's any questions for Narnia throughout today's session, you're more than welcome to ask those questions. I'm going to start off, Professor, by asking, tell me a bit about yourself and the work that you do. We've gotten some background there, which is quite a hectic title, but what does that all entail?
Yeah, it's sometimes difficult to explain. So it's easy to explain what a law professor does and what a law teacher does. But when I came to Pretoria, I started working in a completely different space. So it's a space of research, but it's not research for the sake of research. So we do research that tries to fulfill a purpose, and we do research in the public good. So we try to, as much as possible anyway, advise policymakers with evidence so that our policymakers can make the right decisions. And we fall under the Department of Science and Innovation. So it's a completely different type of work from a university. We do big, large-scale surveys. We do multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary projects. And we have conversations with policymakers, and we always hope that what we're doing is going to be making a difference. So currently I'm leading and managing a research team of about 50 people. The Human Sciences Research Council has realigned, so now I have a bigger program. And that only began during lockdown. So that's why I was mentioning being on Zoom all the time, because we constantly have to have management meetings, staff meetings, project meetings, meetings with stakeholders and customers. So yeah, it's pretty frenetic, and it's not always easy doing it online. But I guess we're getting used to it because we are not going to be going back to office for a while.
And you must be missing the touring, you know, because I see you fly a lot and obviously go to all the different countries. That's probably a big part that you also miss.
No, I miss that the most. I must say, when lockdown started, I'd already organized to go to Reykjavik for a conference and to Lisbon. Yeah, I do travel a lot. And I read somewhere the International Transport Agency said we're not going to be able to fly internationally until 2023.
Wow.
So I was kind of shocked when I read that. I don't know if that's just speculation, but they seem to know what they're talking about. Obviously, local travel is going to be opened earlier, but the Minister of Tourism said only in December, so that's also a long time to wait.
Yeah.
So I'm still participating in all these international conferences and webinars, but of course I'm sitting behind a screen like I am with you now, which isn't really the same as being there, and sometimes running out and just feeling some of the culture of the places that you go to. So I miss it a lot, yes.
I also miss it a lot. I was saying yesterday to my parents that I miss getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and going down to Tambu. Just last year, I think I finished off of 104 flights, which was domestic and international for 2019. And it was a busy year. I was flying a lot. And I miss it so much this year that I would just love to sit on the plane and go somewhere as well. So I completely know how you feel about it. So tell us about what have you established through your research about the impact of the lockdown in the area of democracy and human rights. We see a lot of people saying it's, it's against our human rights, that lockdowns can carry on so long. For example, people that smoke, people that want alcohol, are saying it's against their rights. How can you keep that away from us? Because that's not, if I, for example, smoke, that's not causing me to have panic attacks and so forth. So what would you say of that?
Okay, so like you mentioned earlier, we did do a survey with the University of Johannesburg Centre for Social Change. We started the survey kind of just after the lockdown had begun, the first one, and we ran it until the 4th of May. So we got quite a good period of time over which to look at people's opinions and maybe some changes in trends. And we want to start a follow-up survey next week because things are changing very rapidly. So we had some interesting outcomes from the survey, and maybe I can just mention some of those. And I was telling people the other day, you know, sometimes you see the outcome of the survey and you think, "Whoa, really? Is that what people think?" But I just want to emphasize that the HSRC does scientific surveys. We follow international benchmarks, and we weight our surveys based on the population information of the Stats SA office. And the person who weighted and did all the technical stuff for us is actually a former statistician general. So it's a reflection of the views of the whole population, if you look at it mathematically and statistically. So the thing that really struck me, because I was a human rights lecturer and I did a lot of work on the Constitution and wrote about gender equality and human rights, was that 66% of people are prepared to give up sacrifice some of their rights to ensure that they are safe and the people around them are safe during this time of COVID-19. So that's the majority of people. But what's interesting, if you look at the demographic, then you'll see that there's a little bit of difference. So the group of age-wise, the group of people that are most willing to sacrifice their rights are from ages 25 to 55. And the youth are less willing to sacrifice their rights, and they're less in love, they're less supportive of the lockdown. But that makes complete sense. I also note it's from 18 years over, not school children. But it makes sense that when we're young and reckless and restless, we obviously don't want to be stuck at home. Sorry?
And above 35 years?
Yeah, it was the support for the lockdown was strongest, and the sacrifice of human rights was strongest from between the ages of 25 and 55.
Okay.
If you look at that block, okay, so the youngsters 18 to 24, not as supportive of sacrificing the human rights, not as supportive of the lockdown. That's obvious. And then obviously older people, they're more at risk, so they're more supportive of the lockdown and more supportive of sacrificing some of their rights. But the thing that we didn't do in the survey, which we want to do in the next one, is ask which rights are you prepared to sacrifice? Because you can see there's a lot of different ramifications, right? So all over the world, when you look at the lockdown, there's been a limitation on rights. So the obvious one is the right to movement. So we obviously lost completely for some way. We couldn't move anywhere. We had to stay at home, except to go to the shops and pharmacy, doctor. We lost the right to freedom of association, which means we couldn't gather in groups anymore, like parties, churches, clubs, stokvels, book clubs, everything like that. We lost that. We lost the right to some extent anyway, a lot of people lost the right to access to education, students as well as school kids. And to some extent, we are now going to be losing our right to privacy. So there's a lot of worry now about the surveillance state and this tracking and tracing thing that's going to be happening. So maybe I can talk a little bit about that later. Yes. Would you want to talk about it now?
No. Well, let's. I'd love to know what you thought about the research as well. And with regards to the findings that you found and what worried you about findings on it. I must also mention what I've noticed when I walk, obviously going to walk in the mornings between 6 and 9 o'clock, is that I find in the area that I live in that mostly the elderly people are not wearing masks when they walk. It's the younger people, it's the mum and dads, but the elderly people are not wearing masks at all. And that's what I actually found in my area, which is also quite worrying, because if I have it correct, they're the people at most at risk for getting the disease.
Absolutely. I mean, people over the age of 60 are most at risk, and obviously people with underlying autoimmune conditions. So it is very surprising to hear that elderly people are not wearing cloth masks, because when it comes to science, it's a necessity. Also, you can be fined, right? So maybe they've got the money. They don't worry about the 2,000 rand fine that they're going to get if they don't wear their masks. I mean, people are even expected to wear their masks around their necks in their cars. The moment you open your window, you have to pull your mask up. And if you don't, I think the woman in Joburg or something got a 10,000 rand fine when she was stopped by the police and she hadn't pulled her mask up. So, I mean, these are really important things, and we're seeing that people aren't necessarily following the rules. And as we open up, it's really important that people do follow the rules. And what's really disturbing is that people are afraid. So we tested like emotions a little bit. We asked people how they're feeling. So most people are feeling afraid. About 2/3 of the country are feeling afraid. And it's obvious that we need to feel afraid, because this is something that it's like never been experienced since the Spanish flu, right? Or since 1918, and less people are dying now because we have better hospitals and better medical systems. But this is a kind of a monstrous thing. It's an invisible enemy, so to speak. So most people are afraid, and then secondly, very stressed and worried. And interestingly, women are more stressed and worried than men are, but that's just generally speaking, I think. So the worrying thing is this level of fear and stress and worry that people are experiencing. But I think what we're seeing more and more is frustration and irritability, and even anger to some extent, because there was a lot of support for the lockdown initially, right? So President Ramaphosa's support was at 85%. His support is still very high, but as things go on, I think people are really tired of being locked up now. So I think we're in the 17th day of level 4. And let's say level 4 is really not very different from level 5. No. Exercising for 3 hours in the morning in winter, that's something that's changed. But I mean, people expected the cigarette ban to end. They expected the alcohol ban to end. So there's like more of a sense of restlessness now than there was before. And so the trust in government is probably going down, because some of the ministers have made some very strange decisions. And when trust in government goes down, then people don't follow rules and regulations.
No.
So we need to make sure that we maintain that trust by making sure that we have all the information that we need. People are complaining that they don't know enough. And that's something else that came up in the survey. People were saying, look, don't be afraid to tell us the truth. We're not afraid of the truth. We want to know what's happening. We want to know what the scientists are saying, what the economists are saying. But so it's freedom of information as well. And then I was talking about the whole surveillance thing. So the Protection of Personal Information Act hasn't been It's been promulgated, but it hasn't been brought into force. So if people's information is accessed via cell phones now, there's no legislative protection for using that personal information for other purposes. So there again, you have to say, well, do you trust government and private companies? Because like MTM, you know, Cell C, Vodacom, they're also going to have open access to this information. Do we trust them to look after us, to look after the information that they're going to use to track and trace? So a lot of it has to do with trust. And trust is eroding, and that's very concerning. It didn't come across in the survey, but I think when we conduct the next survey, we may see that. You know, the open-toed shoes, the alcohol issue, the cigarettes issue. Look, it's not a human right to smoke and to drink. I guess we all have the right to be free, but one can't really say my human right. It's an entitlement that you have, okay? Because we live in a free society. But, you know, freedom is important. So we have to take into account the fact that smokers are going through terrible withdrawals, but nothing is being done to assist them. The calls to helplines, mental illness helplines, South African Depression Group doubled, almost tripled in the last few weeks. Yeah, so I mean, that's worrying. So trust is waning. People are frustrated. They're tired. They don't know what to expect. And I can see that even if the lockdown moves to level 3, it's still going to be frightening, right? Because we are going to see an increase in infections. Yeah, it's inevitable that we're going to see, but at least the healthcare system's been given some time to get ready, so that by the time we open up, the infections increase, there are enough hospital beds, there are enough ventilators. And that's actually what the Minister of Health said today. He said, look, the health system is ready now, so it's inevitable that we need to lift the lockdown, and we can't have a situation where people are starving to death in their homes. We need to start opening the economy quite urgently.
Definitely. There's some questions just coming in. Before we go on with some that I've got, let's go through to Carmen here. Carmen's asking, good afternoon, Neil and Professor Narnia. I know the government is taking knock from criticism, and I know that this is uncharted territory. What concerns me about the lockdown is, number one, the number of people that are no longer earning an income. Number two, then as a result, they cannot feed themselves. My question is this not an infringement of their basic human rights? Also, the violence that the army and police have resorted to, is this all okay? And if not, what actions can people take? And how do how democratic is this lockdown? So there's two questions there. There's specifically about earning the income, the result that they obviously can't feed themselves, and so forth.
Okay, so the first one around food, that's one of the reasons why Dr. Gray, who's part of the Ministerial Advisory Committee, was saying the lockdown needs to be lifted, because she's seeing more malnutrition children than she's seen in the past 25 years. And so when faced with something like that, you know, that's terrifying, and it shouldn't be happening. So government did try and put in some measures, because obviously the right to food is a human right as well. So government did put in some measures, but there were delays with the food packages. First of all, people were made to stand in queues. That didn't work. Then government decided to use grassroots level and NGOs, which was much better. And so the food packages are being distributed properly now to families in need. But because it's a bureaucracy, it takes a long time. But at least there were measures put in place. But it's a serious concern. And then the army and the police and the regulation of the lockdown, look, we were declared in a state of national disaster. We weren't declared a state of emergency. So there's a difference between the two, and this is where the legal part comes in. So under a national disaster, we don't sacrifice our rights, really. I mean, people see it that way, but it's a temporary limitation of rights.
Yes.
And that limitation must be reasonable and justifiable in an open and democratic society. That's in the Constitution, Section 36. Yeah. So our rights can be limited, but they need to be limited within the context of what we are experiencing now. So there is some justification, and there was some justification in the limitation of some of these rights. But there has to be a test that's put in place to say, is it reasonable and justifiable to limit these rights? And if not, what are we going to do about it? So there's a lot of people going to court now, and we know about the big case that the DA is going into now to challenge, I think it's the National Coronavirus Command Council and the role that it plays. And it's a technical legal argument because it's whether it makes binding decisions or whether it's the ministers who are actually making the decisions. Well, actually, it's the ministers who are making the decision. The Command Council is not a legal body. It must just monitor and manage the situation. So that's going to be an interesting court case. And there are other cases that have gone to court, and in particular, there was mention of the army and the military and the violence that's going on. So 5% of people in our survey said that they've actually experienced violence at the hands of the police and the army. And of course, we had Mr. Koza, who died and was tortured to death. And that the High Court has made some really strong statements around what happened there. So in a state of national disaster, if the police and the army go out into the streets, they're supposed to help. They're not supposed to harm. And I think Ramaphosa keeps saying that in his speeches as well. But you can't control everything. And the streets are kind of flooded by the army in particular, 73,000. The people had a massive problem with that, right? As well. They had a massive problem with the curfew. And abuse is inevitable when you put the police and army out into the streets without much control being exercised. So I think it was Judge Fabricius in the High Court really criticized the Minister of Police and Defense for the way in which they handled the situation. They didn't suspend the members. And then he said, if trust in the army and the police and government flounders, then our social contract will break down, and that puts democracy at risk. So I don't think we're moving towards a totalitarian state because the president was at pains to write quite a long letter, if you want to look it up online, about how he wants us to retain a strong democracy. He doesn't mind if people go to courts. We have an independent and really good judicial system. Go to courts and challenge government and let the courts decide. He was one of the most important players in the drafting of our constitution. Era with Rolf May is kind of almost the symbol of democracy. So I think that there's a little bit, and I think probably a lot of people would disagree with me, but I think there's a little bit of hysteria going on around the fact that we are becoming an authoritarian state. No, we haven't become one yet. And I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future, but there always risks. So civil society and organizations must hold government to account. The biggest problem for me is that Parliament isn't playing a very good oversight role at the moment. And so we're not seeing a lot from Parliament. We're not hearing from parliamentarians. And that's one of the most important bodies for holding the executive, the ministers, to account. And that needs to happen in order to strengthen this democracy that we have and that we still have. The South African Human Rights Commission is keeping a close eye on what's happening with the police and the National Defence Force. So we're not in a situation where we're helpless. We have agency, and we have the right to speak out, and we have the right to speak out about injustices as well. Nobody's silencing anyone. Well, some ministers have odd, I don't know how to say, ways of dealing with these things, and they need to be spoken to. But generally speaking, I think that we are in a very difficult situation, and the Minister of Health in particular is trying really hard to manage this, and he's not doing anything that's much different from what is being done all over the world.
I see Carmen saying here that's so true. Parliament has been very quiet of late, and I also just want to mention, I had a meeting this morning with a client in a neighboring country, and they also mentioned that their police was enforcing by hitting people to be in their homes with whips, and he's hitting the people with whips specifically. And we've seen videos all over. It's not just in our country; it's literally happening all over, and it is difficult to enforce when there's so many people out. How do you go and check what each person's doing in every single street? It's a concern that, and hopefully, these things will come right. And you've seen with our government, they have at least taken action with those people that have been committing these things that's been reported. Maria saying here, greetings from Venezuela. In my country, COVID-19 has become an excuse to raise the volume of repression. Quarantine is for us as a form of social control, and that's what happened in Venezuela. Lynn is saying here, jury is out on which is better, breathing oxygen versus breathing in your own carbon for an hour in the green space. By all means, don't put others at risk if you're ill or if you're in a very crowded space specifically. And we also saw that person that was running in the last few days that his lungs collapsed from running with a mask on, because you're obviously not getting the oxygen you should get. Maria is also saying, understand it is important to stay at home, yet we cannot surrender to authoritarianism as well. And she also added on here, and here we cannot go to court. Venezuela is not the only case. I'd like to hear from you. What is your vision on the theme in the wide context specifically?
Okay, so hi Maria. I know Maria very well, and I'm glad that she's joined us. Look, Venezuela is very different from South Africa, right? So Venezuela is not an open and democratic society by any means. So I can imagine that the approach there is quite frightening and just another excuse to control the population. The same that is happening in Brazil. Well, in Brazil, there's denialism, which is maybe even worse because more people die. So with regards to your experiences in Venezuela, Maria, you have very strong social movements already. And I think that you need to kind of just mobilize and find ways of getting your message out really to the rest of the world, because Venezuela has been very cut off. And we need to be made aware. I mean, Human Rights Watch needs to be made aware of the abuses that are happening there, and all the other human rights bodies that exist internationally, as well as obviously your human rights activists within Venezuela. So, I mean, my heart bleeds. There's so many different tragedies that are happening all over the world in terms of Venezuela being overly socially controlling, in terms of the US and the UK not being controlling enough. I mean, look at the deaths that are happening there. And, you know, people who say, it's okay, I'm not scared of the virus because I'm young and fit. So just open up. They're not respecting the fact that every single one death that happens is one too many. So we almost we are over 300,000 deaths in the world already. South Africa is looking at a death rate that's increasing, but not as much as in other countries, thankfully. But we can't just say one or the other. This is not a black and white situation. It's a gray situation. We have to try and find our way through it. So yeah, jogging with a mask on is probably really challenging, you know. So maybe different kinds of materials can be found. We need to be very innovative at the moment in the way that we do things. And there's no rigid right or wrong answer. It's a time of flexibility and innovation, in the same way that we're living in a constantly changing society because of 4-hour and technology. This virus is forcing us to change in many, many ways. And we have to accept that life is not going to go back to the way it was before. Even if we open up, our lives are not going to be the same as they were before. A lot of people have to get back on their feet. Maybe the smokers and the drinkers will be happier because they'll have more access to what they need. But there are other things we're not going to be able to do, like we're not going to be able to travel. We're not going to be able to, well, like the president says, we're not going to be able to hug or kiss. I doubt that. But you know what he meant, right? So, the social distancing thing is really hard, and we don't live this way. It's not our culture as South Africans. There's a massive overall. Pardon?
Massive changes overall, and the way we live. As we're getting into our last 10 minutes, I'm just going to go through a few more questions over here. For those who's joining us now, we're talking to Narnia Bohler-Muller about our democracy, our human rights, and COVID-19 specifically. If you've got any questions for her, you're more than welcome to ask, or any thoughts on what she's sharing. Do you agree? Do you disagree? In the comment box. And in this coming Wednesday, we will have a different speaker on, and Friday. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 o'clock, a different speaker will join us here. Do not forget, this coming Friday, it's myself that will be on, talking marketing specifically. This coming Wednesday at 5 o'clock will be Vinny Linen, all the way from America. He's one of our shark tankers, for those that remember him. And then next week, Monday, Kobe Portita, and it continues like that. You can all go through our Oracle Media Facebook page and check all of the events out there. As we go into our last few minutes, you mentioned Parliament. You're worried about the way Parliament's interacting specifically, Narnia. Do you think government is managing the process well?
Well, government consists of, the state consists of 3 branches. So Parliament, the executive, cabinet, and the judiciary. So we're seeing far more of the executive, the president and cabinet at the moment, and that's allowed under the legislation, that regulations are made by ministers and that there are deliberations in cabinets, and that's the executive arm. The legislative arm, people trust the courts a lot in South Africa for good reason. And the legislative arm is functioning. So people are taking things to court and they're being dealt with in court. The arm or the branch that is probably the quietest is Parliament. So I'm not saying Parliament isn't doing anything, because they invited the HSRC to speak to the Appropriations Committee a few weeks ago to ask us, where budget should be cut, so that the money can be directed to COVID. Like, should it be cut at local government level, or should it be cut in in I don't know, the arts and all that stuff. So they are having portfolio committee meetings, but Parliament isn't really sitting and debating these things. We're just hearing from political parties. So, I mean, government isn't accountable to political parties. Government's accountable, or the president and his executive are accountable to Parliament. And Parliament therefore needs to really start sitting, debating, calling ministers, asking them what they're basing their regulations on, what is the rationale, why is it justifiable what they've decided to do, rather than just have individual politicians, you know, getting up in public spaces, because that's not a debate. That's just you know, that's just politicking. We need to move in a way that's not going to damage our social contracts. South Africans need one another, and one of my takeaway, because I said I'd give you a takeaway message, and that is that there seems to be a lot of goodwill in South Africa at the moment towards others. The survey, for example, says more than 80% of everyone across race, class, and gender are worried about the economy. They're worried about people not having jobs. They support UIF interventions. They support food parcels. And people are aware of the suffering. So there's a potential that this can increase our social cohesion. But it can also fall apart, you know, where we're at the precipice. So what my takeaway message would be, just for us to act in goodwill, you know, and in good faith. And that's so important. So to follow the rules that scientists, the World Health Organization, the CDC, the NIC, follow those rules so that you protect yourself and others, and, you know, be altruistic, help people in need. And that's basic message that I think I'd like to bring across.
Before I let you go, Narnia, there's two things I'd like to know. Do you think South Africa will emerge from this crisis as the democracy it used to before? And also, what are the risks we face in the short and medium term specifically?
Short-term risks, definitely hunger and job losses. And, you know, as many measures as we put in place, that's not going to be resolved until the economy is opened up. But the economy needs to be opened up carefully. So that is the most immediate risk. And I think the more we can just try to assist people in need, not just expect government to do so, but do so ourselves as individuals, to assist people in need, we should do that. You know, donate to Gift of the Givers, donate to NGOs who are distributing food. You know, try to make a difference as much as you can, because you sort of medium and long term is we're going to have a hangover from all of this. Our economy is going to continue to suffer for years to come. The virus isn't going to go away. Maybe 18 months from now, we'll have a vaccine. But until then, life is going to be very uncertain. So I'm not a modeler, I'm not Nostradamus, I can't predict anything. But what I can say is that this isn't going to go away very quickly in the medium and long term. So we just have to put on our seatbelts, really, and go along on this sort of roller coaster ride that we're on. But I'm not really worried about our democracy. I think there's going to be a new way of dealing with things going forward. President Ramaphosa said that there are going to be more localized district bodies that are going to be giving advice, including civil society, NGOs, business, and so on, advice about what to do in various districts. So even though people don't like the idea of, you know, treating districts differently, it's going to be done in a consultative way. So our democracy is about consultation and public participation. And I think that we're moving more into that space now. At the beginning, we needed to be told like children, because if we weren't, people wouldn't have listened. But now we're starting to treat a little bit more like adults again, and I think that's gonna be happening going forward. We're going to be more involved. We're going to be more active. We're going to be the active citizens that we should be. And internationally, we're known as a country who doesn't sit back when it comes to human rights violations. We have a very active citizenry in South Africa, and people aren't going to keep quiet if things go wrong. So I think our democracy is going to be just fine.
That's awesome to hear. I think that a lot of people are worried about that specifically, and you know, how will we come out at the end of this going forward. Thank you so much for joining me today, Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller. It's really nice to hear your insight and, you know, what we're going through in the studies. I'd love to know, when you do that study again, how has it actually changed from the first like 30 days to going into the second 30 days now? Because I know specifically, even with myself, in the beginning, you know, I was all for it, and now I'm going, yes, I want to go out, I'm getting a bit over it, and so forth. And look, we know we can't go out, but it's obviously you mentally feeling that, because you're stuck at home the whole time, and all you want to do is just leave home.
Yeah, even the introverts in our society don't like this feeling of isolation anymore. I think 5 weeks was okay. 7 to 8 weeks is too much, and we're all feeling it. I think even if you agree with everything that's being done, it doesn't mean that you're happy about it. Yeah, we're making major sacrifices, but we're not only making sacrifices because government said we must. We're making sacrifices because the virus is requiring us to make these sacrifices.
Definitely. I'd love to have a chat with you again in a month's time, see how things have changed, and so forth. For those of us joining us for Wednesday and Friday sessions, don't forget this coming Wednesday at 5 o'clock, Vinnie Lingham joining us. This Friday, I'm talking marketing. Next week, Monday, it continues every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here at 3 o'clock on the Oracle Media Facebook page. Thank you so much for joining us today. The last comment that's come in, good point, Neil. Further HSRC surveys would be very useful. We need to track the changes in attitude as well. And that's from Michael, that's come through. I'd love to know those. So let us know when you're ready with those, Professor.
I will, definitely. That's what we want to do, is we want to track the trends. And so I would love to be invited again, and I'll let you know when we're ready.
Awesome. For those of you who've joined in today, I'd love to know one thing you're taking away from today's talk. If you could, please comment in the comment box and just tell us one thing you're taking away from what Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller has shared for us. And I never thought in 2000 and, well, I think 7, when I was a student of yours in law, that I'd be interviewing you in 2020, especially about COVID-19. But thank you so much for joining us. I see a lot of people saying thank you so much. They really enjoyed today, from Carmen to Maria to Benjamin as well, saying well done, Narnia, interesting discussion. And then we'll have you back in a month's time.
Yes, thanks so much, Neil. Life has changed a lot, but we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good Monday. And for those of us doing us, I'll see you this coming Wednesday, 5 o'clock with Vinnie Lingham. Have a good afternoon. And Narnia, I'll chat to you soon.
Yeah,
bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.